In a world that demands constant innovation and fresh ideas, creativity is a skill that cannot be overlooked. Luckily, studies show that creative thinking can be learned and developed by anyone. I'm Rich Burnett for Wondrium, and in this episode of Perspectives, 4 experts discuss ways to harness your inner creative genius and to make it a habit in your daily life. We begin now by looking at what some of the most creative minds of our time have to say about the creative process.
Genius is 2% inspiration and 98% perspiration. Before Edison, the American author, teacher, and lecturer Kate Sanborn similarly said that genius is inspiration, talent, and perspiration. Of course, perspiration on its own is not enough. You can try very hard and still fail to be creative. In fact, sometimes trying too hard gets in the way of generating new ideas because you become fixated on a small subset of thoughts. Graham Wallas, founder of the London School of Economics and author of The Art of Thought, picked up on this problem and broke the creative process down into steps back in 1926. These steps, which he based on his own empirical studies and on the words of famous innovators and other creatives, continue to influence models of creativity today. Wallas suggested that the first step in creativity is preparation, gathering relevant information, honing any necessary skills, defining the problem or goal, and entering the right frame of mind, whatever that might be. This step is deliberate, effortful, and conscious. Next comes incubation, where unconscious processing comes into play. This is a somewhat magical stage that we don't know that much about, although we do know that certain circumstances seem important at this juncture, both inside and outside of the brain. We want conditions that allow the prefrontal cortex to take a back seat, rather than be the main driver of our thoughts. We want to be in an environment in which it's safe to let our minds wander, like on a hike or in the bath. The key feature of incubation is that thinking is neither deliberate nor effortful, with the mind free to wander. Wallas noted that consciously engaging in unrelated mental tasks might be more effective during this step than attempting to stop all conscious thought entirely, which of course is very difficult to do. After allowing thoughts to percolate a bit, the next step, illumination, often comes suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere. This is the aha moment, where the solution or creative idea comes to consciousness clearly and well-defined. Wallas noted that you can't force illumination. You have to allow it to happen rather than willing it to. The last step in the creativity process, verification, is important but often overlooked. This is where we tweak, test, and iterate the novel idea to ensure that it is, in fact, the right solution. Here we once again are engaging in deliberate, effortful work. The late psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was credited with popularizing the concept of creative flow, further divided this last stage into 2, evaluation and elaboration. He suggested that elaboration, roughly equivalent to the iteration embedded in Wallas's verification step, is actually the most difficult part of the creative process and reflects the perspiration part of Thomas Edison's famous saying. Csikszentmihalyi cautioned against interpreting these stage models as neat depictions of the creative process. A person who makes a creative contribution never just slogs through the long last stage of elaboration, he noted. This part of the process is constantly interrupted by periods of incubation and is punctuated by small epiphanies.
We'll begin by looking at divergent thinking, this fundamental skill, and we'll examine 4 proven principles for improving divergent thinking. Ways to improve your mindset, your attitude. The key principle is to defer judgment. Defer judgment means to temporarily suspend one's evaluation. Now, I said this is the key principle, The reason why I suggested this is the key principle is that it's required for all the others. You've got to get this one right, or it's very difficult to be able to adhere to the other principles and guidelines. Neuroscience gives us some insight into how deferring judgment works. You see, we're creative. We're most creative when our prefrontal lobe, the self-monitoring part of our brain, is less active. There's research that has demonstrated the profound positive effects of deferred judgment. In fact, one of the earliest studies of the creative process conducted by another one of our founding faculty members, Sid Parnes. He conducted a simple yet elegant study. We had two groups of students. They were given a challenge, a real-life challenge to solve and asked to generate ideas, but the two sets of students were given different instructions. One set was told to suspend judgment, not to evaluate their ideas as they were generating them. The second group was told to come up with good ideas, to generate good ideas, and by suggesting good ideas, this communicates the need to evaluate. What they found at the end of the study, when they evaluated the sets of ideas generated by these students, is that those who deferred judgment, who followed that principle, ended up generating twice as many good ideas as those who were told to generate good ideas. We'll move to the second principle of divergent thinking. It's called goal for quantity. Nobel laureate Linus Pauling perhaps said it best. He said the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. See, the notion here is that quantity will lead to quality. We want to leverage probability. The more options you have, the more probable you are to have a breakthrough. And this has been demonstrated through Dean Simonton's research. Dean Simonton, a well-known current creativity researcher. He's looked at eminently creative individuals and he's found that the number of creative breakthroughs they generate is directly related to the amount of work they produce. Let's look at the next principle. Let's start off by playing a little word association. I'm going to say a word. You think of the first word that comes to mind. Salt. Table. Up. Our minds are wired to make associations. In fact, it's predictable, probably, the words that came to mind when I said salt, table, and up. You probably said chair when, or excuse me, you probably said pepper when I said salt. You said chair when I said table. You said up, or you thought of down when I said up. It's natural. Hearing a song brings back a memory if you had that experience, or as you look around and you see something, it reminds you of something that you have to do. This occurs all the time. Our mind links ideas together, and this is a powerful source for creativity. You see, new ideas don't come from thin air. If there is a muse to creativity, the muse is past ideas. The mobile phone, the car, the internet, clearly creative. They didn't pop full and complete and perfect form. They built off of past ideas. They came from ideas that were borrowed and synthesized. This third principle of divergent thinking we call make connections. Let's move to the fourth principle. It's called seek novelty. Seeking novelty is about having dreams. It's blue sky thinking. It's going big. It's trying out new things. Alex Osborne, who created these four principles for divergent thinking, said it's easier to tame down a wild idea than it is to invigorate a weak idea. What seems impractical today can be reality tomorrow. Science fiction is full of examples. Think of Star Trek in the 1960s and their communicators. And today we have mobile phones.
So I always advise writers to schedule a weekly creativity time, a minimum of half an hour every week. I like to go to my local coffee establishment for this. It's a time when you do nothing but creative exercise, intending to generate ideas, writing them down. I like to do that with a pen and paper, by the way, because that opens up another part of my brain, and I need as many parts open as I can manage. So here are some of my favorite creativity exercises. The what if game. This is the biggie. the gushing fountain of creativity. Train yourself to ask, what if? All the time, driving down the street. I'll see a billboard of happy people in a restaurant and think, what if there was a bomb under the table? Or I'll see a man in a suit standing on the corner waiting for the light to change and think, what if he's a hitman and his mark is across the street in that Arby's? If you are intentional about this, eventually your imagination will train itself to do this on its own. Usually when you're in the shower, just don't forget to write it down when you get out. The first line game. Dean Koontz, in his book, How to Write Best-Selling Fiction, written in 1981, told how he used to do this all the time in order to find material. So one day he wrote this line, "You ever killed anything?" Roy asked. He stared at it a while and then decided Roy was 14 and talking to a younger boy. And that one line he developed became his early bestseller, The Voice of the Night. Now, I love first lines, and I have a file dedicated to a bunch that I've made up. I can think of 3 right now that have led eventually to books. One example is a novella I wrote called Framed. And it came about this way. I was playing the first line game, and I wrote, "It's not every day you bleed to death." I had no idea who my character was or how he got into the implied predicament. So I started to play with it. How could this have happened? Was it a suicide attempt or a murder attempt? Did my character have a near-death experience? Could he be narrating from the beyond? I kept asking myself what-if questions and writing things down, and eventually came up with an explanation that I liked. And from there, I proceeded to develop the story. News flashes. There's always something going on in the news, of course. And if you're into political or crime thrillers, there's always lots of fodder for those. The great TV series Law & Order constantly mined news stories and fictionalized them. But go beyond that. Find the personal stories, the local items, the odd news. In Hollywood some years back, a very large man in a convertible was pulled over for drunk driving. It was Christmas season, and he was full of tequila. But the odd thing was that he was dressed only in a Santa hat and a G-string. I had to use that, and it became the beginning of my novel, Try Fear. So collect these. Throw them in a file.
Indeed, one general piece of advice for boosting creativity that's been supported by many different studies is to be happy. If you're depressed, sad, distressed, anxious, anything but happy, your creative abilities seem to be compromised. Listening to happy music will boost your creativity while you listen to it and for at least a few minutes after. But in general, everyday happiness will boost it on a more long-term basis. As you prepare to undertake a challenging task, one for which you want to marshal your most creative thinking, it's worth starting by doing something that makes you happy. One task that's associated with boosting happiness, as well as creativity, is walking. Many great thinkers have been regular walkers. Charles Dickens claimed that he walked about 30 miles per day while thinking about his writing. Darwin, Aldous Huxley, Winston Churchill, a lot of great thinkers have talked and written about mental benefits of walking. Friedrich Nietzsche, the famous philosopher, once wrote that all truly great thoughts are conceived while walking. A tradition that goes all the way back to ancient Greece and the so-called peripatetic school, literally the walking school, founded by the followers of Aristotle. So the recent research provides solid evidence for this belief. If you want to be a more creative thinker, take your thoughts and yourself out for a stroll. While you're on that stroll, indeed, even when you aren't, it's a good idea to carry a pocket notepad and a pencil. The best creative thinkers tend to be people who engage in a wide variety of tasks. If you feel stuck with a particular problem or set of challenges and want to develop more creative solutions to it, going and trying something new can help. Doing so can stimulate your brain in novel ways. Indeed, this is probably the reason that going for a walk outside or even being pushed in a wheelchair outside boosts creative thinking. As your senses and body are stimulated with a wide variety of different inputs, the internal state of your brain's activation will tend to vary more as well. Finding a creative connection between two pieces of information will only happen if the brain circuits that encode those two pieces of information are active at the same time, or at least nearly the same time. If you increase the variety of ways in which your brain is stimulated, this increases the chance of these unusual co-activations taking place. Another tip that's associated with improved creative problem solving and creative work in general is ironically to do nothing, at least not right away. Just take some time to think about the problem or your general goals before you seriously undertake the work of addressing them. Notice that this is also good advice for dealing with procrastination. Ironically here, I'm suggesting that you do engage in a little delay in order to boost your creativity. Doing nothing for a little while is good advice for overcoming procrastination. But for the purposes of creativity, there's good evidence that doing nothing can also help avoid the opposite problem, known as precrastination. Precrastination is the tendency to begin work on some important task for the sake of getting it done, and out of the way, even when that immediate commencement of work is detrimental to overall success. Procrastination, of course, is the tendency to delay work on some important task, even when that delay is detrimental to success and even general happiness of the procrastinator. Across a wide range of different types of problems, easy, hard, short, long, taking a break and getting away from the problem seems to help in finding a creative solution to it. If you're stuck trying to find a creative solution to something, the clear tip here is to work at it for a while, but then take a break. Several studies suggest that if you can include some sleep and some dreaming during that break time, the effects are significantly enhanced. If your incubation period includes a night of sleep, during which time you will dream, you'll be even more likely to solve problems like this, or whatever problems you're trying to address with your creative brain. My last tip for boosting creativity is a tip to enhance your memory of your own dreams. Try keeping a dream journal. As during other times of the day, have a notebook on hand, next to your bed with a pen, and a dim nightlight you can turn on in the middle of the night. Most people awake with a memory of a dream, at least sometimes. When that happens, grab the notebook and jot down some notes about the dream that you just had. Then go back to sleep. The experience of reading those notes in the morning can be just plain fun, which itself can be kind of a boost for creativity. Remember that the moment your dream ends, it begins to rapidly fade from your memory. The notes, clearly written by you, but about something that you don't remember in detail, is a strange thing. When I've read my own notes in this situation, I occasionally get the strange feeling that someone else wrote them. Most people think of creativity as unbridled thought, of waiting for an inspired solution to simply arrive. The tips I've described here will all help with your creativity, but they won't work in isolation. If you listen to happy music, incubate your thoughts across the night of sleep, give yourself time to think before you start working, even if you do all of those things, you'll still need to invest effort in searching for creative ideas and solutions. If you invest both your inspiration and your perspiration, that's creativity.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about the topics in this episode, the full list of series that these clips came from is in the description below. You can watch them all now on Wondrium.